So Aronson designed what he called a jigsaw classroom as a way of trying to have contact between groups in ways that minimize the power differential, to see if that sort of contact, that very specific contact, without the influence of the status difference, could in fact reduce prejudice. And here's how a jigsaw classroom works. Students are put in groups, but it's not like a typical group that you might have in a project here. It's mostly done with elementary, middle school kids. In the learning group, each student is given a specific role and given some unique information so that for the group to accomplish the project they're given, each student in the group possesses some unique critical information. And this is very specifically designed so that students who come to the group sort of with more status, they start on better footing, don't just dominate and sort of ignore the people who come to the group with less status or less power. So basically by giving everybody in the group some critical information, you're equating on status within the group. And you're basically creating a situation where the group has no choice but to go to each member of the group for necessary information. So each student in the group has to master and learn his or her own information to share with the group, but each group has to go to each member of that group to get the complete picture of information. So they really, this is sort of the classroom equivalent of what Sharif was trying to do in the third week of Robber's Cave, where he created a situation of basically the need for mutual interdependence. And what Aronson did, first in classrooms that were primarily, I believe, mixed Caucasian African American, and then classrooms that were mixed Caucasian and Latino, he would actually take classrooms and randomly assign classes, one to the jigsaw condition and one to a control condition. And so one class would get a jigsaw experience, like I've just mentioned. The other class would not. And he measured changes in performance, prejudice, stereotypes, and self-esteem. What they found was that students in jigsaw classrooms do show positive effects of the jigsaw experience. Students in the jigsaw classrooms that compared to same age peers without the jigsaw experience showed less prejudice, less stereotyping, they like each other more, they like school more, they have higher sense of empathy towards others, and across racial groups, they show increased self-esteem. So unlike mere contact, having controlled contact where you deal with this sort of power differential that exists naturally by putting kids into this jigsaw situation, that kind of contact does seem to reduce stereotypes and prejudice, improve performance, and improve self-esteem. So that's hopeful. Another area where there's cause for optimism, I think, is work that's been done, and there have been two studies that have come out lately in science, and oh my goodness, when a psychologist gets a paper in science, that is a big deal. You are very happy with yourself for a very long time. There have been two studies in the last 2 years, I believe, that have shown to use stereotype threat interventions to reduce either racial or gender disparities in performance. The idea is as follows. These are researchers who are familiar with stereotype threat. They understand how stereotype threat can influence performance. And what they argue is that the way that stereotype threat messes with you and messes with your performance is that it makes you anxious, it makes you worry. What can counteract that? So they thought about what kind of intervention can counteract the worry that might be caused by stereotype threat activation. And basically what they decided on was what they call self-affirmation interventions. It sounds a little cheesy, but actually I think it's quite a reasonable intervention. Basically what they argue is that stereotype threat, it messes with your values, it causes you to question what you believe in because you're worried about supporting stereotypes. So what they thought was that one way to counter stereotype threat effects was to get students to remind themselves of what their values were, to affirm what was important to them, as a way of perhaps transcending the worry that they might have about potentially reaffirming stereotypes. So in one study, they had 7th graders, and the classes involved both African American and Caucasian students. Control students wrote about particular values that might be important to somebody else. Students who were given the intervention were asked to indicate their most important value and write about why that value was important to them. So they were affirming values that were important to them. They did this once during the school year. It was a very small intervention. They followed these students over the course of the school year. In the school, in these classrooms, there was a racial achievement gap where the African American students did tend to perform less well in terms of their grades than the Caucasian students. What they found in this first study was that this small affirmation intervention, write about what values are important to you, reduced the achievement gap between the Caucasian and African American students by 40% at the end of the semester. It didn't eliminate it, but it did reduce the disparity in performance quite a bit, and this is a very, very small manipulation. One time, write about something that's important to you. This was recently replicated using college students in an introductory physics class, looking at the male-female disparity in performance in physics. Intervention students were asked to write about their values. And similar to the study before. And control groups wrote about why other people valued what they did. They looked again at performance in the physics course over the course of the semester. And similar to the finding with the 7th graders, what they found is that this intervention affirming values did not eliminate the male-female difference in performance in the course, but they did raise females' modal grades in the course from a C range to a B range. So it actually bumped up the affirmation women's performance a whole letter grade. Small intervention didn't eliminate the male-female disparity in performance in the introductory physics class, but it did have a significant impact, and it had the biggest impact among those women who did believe the stereotypes. So these are sort of a little bit sideways because they're not targeting the stereotype. They're not like saying the stereotype is true, the stereotype is true. Instead, they're trying to get around the anxiety and worry that may come from worrying about thinking about the stereotype, having it activated, by instead getting people to remember and sort of derive persistence from remembering why what's important that is important, rather than focusing on the concern about reinforcing the stereotypes. So there is some optimism that using social psychological principles and theories and models, they don't just tell us how pervasive stereotype and prejudice effects are. They do that. But they're also starting to tell us, even though they are pervasive, even though there are these cognitive biases that make it hard for us to disabuse ourselves of them, the social psychological models and theories are starting to offer some ways of thinking about using this knowledge, not just to say, well, these are strong effects, but also to say, well, what can we do about them? And even if they're small effects, they are still significant intervention effects. So the processes are ubiquitous, but there is starting to be some chance that these processes will lead to perhaps successful interventions. Any questions about those? Good luck with the exam on Wednesday. We'll start our discussion of sex, love, and attraction on Thursday.